So, Sunderland it's got many claims to fame, hasn't it? Well, writer and photographer Marie Gardner has found many more, including cholera and concrete boats. That's right. I think you heard what I said. Concrete boats. It doesn't sound right, does it? She's made 5 films as part of the Sunderland Library's Literature Festival. So I had a chat with her for you, and obviously I began by asking the most important question. Concrete boats? Tell us more.
The concrete boat story is a favourite of everyone's, which has really surprised me because it's always been a thing that's fascinated us because obviously, I'm from Sunderland, and every time I pass that area down by Clatchy, you would see this concrete boat in the river, and I always remember even as a kid thinking, what on earth is that about? So I was really excited to kind of get the opportunity to research it and find out what it was about, and everybody else loves it too. So it basically, like a lot of things, it came out of what they thought would be necessity. So when resources and things were scarce after the war, it looked like concrete was going to be a cheap, viable alternative to steel. So they commissioned a lot of concrete tugs. It was 8 initially. And anyway, they quickly found out that actually it was a lot more expensive and more of a hassle to make these concrete tugs.
They did float though, didn't they?
They did, yeah, which is always a surprise. But I've been told apparently that they're I think it's concrete submarines as well, which somebody made a joke about. They'd go down very well, but you kind of worry about whether they'd come back up again.
Yeah.
But yeah, it is an unusual thing. But yes, it did float, and they were kicking around for quite a while. But we're sort of only left with crate hose, and they're the one that's plonked in the river in Sunderland.
Yeah. And because a couple of the others didn't have a bump or something. The other ones that were left.
It didn't go well for the concrete boats over their lives, to be honest. There was Crete Rock, which ended up crashing into a trawler. There was Crete Cable, which unfortunately ran aground. Crete Rope ended up being dismantled. And Crete Hawser, our Sunderland one, was in use as a tug, actually, until 1935. And then it was sold for scrap, believe it or not, to the South Stockton Shipment Company. And then the hulk, the remains of what was left after the scrap was taken, was sold back to Sunderland, to the Riverway Commissioners. Yeah. And it ended up being used as an emergency breakwater for a little while, but then got hit during the Second World War and got towed upriver to where it is now, basically, and was just kind of dumped. And I think the council thought about shifting it when they were redeveloping the riverbank, but everybody's a little bit attached to it, so I think they thought it was better to just leave her where she was.
I think concrete boats make people smile. I think it should stay, definitely.
Yeah, me too.
But a lot of the films with the Sunderland Library's Literature Festival, which is why you've made these films, Sunderland allowed cholera in. How did that happen?
You've got to be famous for something, I suppose. So you might as well be famous for that. It was a bit of a weird one, actually, because there was a limit to letting boats and ships into Britain at the time, because obviously we were aware that it was coming. But Sunderland decided to not abide by that and let in a ship that unfortunately did have cholera on board, and that quickly got very out of control. But yes, we had the first officially recorded victim of cholera in England. It is a dark story, and there are a lot of stories, because the videos are taken from my book, Secrets of Sunderland. That's where they come from originally. Yeah. And there are dark stories in there, but I think it's important to learn about and embrace the lessons from the darker periods of history, as well as just sort of, learning about the lighter, fluffy stuff. So although it involves a lot of tragedy and a lot of death at times, I think it is important to learn from that and the lessons from our history.
If you have just joined us, that's Marie Gardner. She's a photographer, she's a writer, she's written a book called Secrets of Sunderland, and she's just done 5 films, part of the Sunderland Library's Literature Festival. So we chatted concrete boats, much more to come after the news, some great stories, and on the way as well, we've got great music from Katy Perry. So my guest this afternoon, really great lady. Her name is Marie Gardner. You can find her on Facebook and all of the projects that she's been doing. And she's written a book called The Secrets of Sunderland. And we were talking a little bit earlier about concrete boats, because there's a concrete boat in Sunderland. Steve, thank you so much for taking the time to text us. Anna, you're on about concrete boats. Years ago, there used to be one down the Ousburn. I think it was more like a barge. Well, it probably did come from the same place that these barges from Sunderland, these boats from Sunderland came. Well, Marie has been delving into the secrets of Weirside. So her book is called Secrets Sunderland. There are lots of dark tales in there, but also there are some that show the city in a really positive light.
We've got a lot to be proud of in Sunderland, I think. And as you say, we do have a lot of lifesavers, people like Harry Watts and Stormy Petrel, people who would, put their lives in danger, in essence, to save other people. And I think there's a lot to be proud of there. And again, you look at the parallels with where we are now, and obviously we've got a lot of people working very hard within, the NHS and stuff now. And of course, it's different, but the parallels are there, aren't they? These are people who are putting their lives on the line for others. And, what is a greater sacrifice than that?
Absolutely. There is no greater sacrifice, is there? And of course you cover the Victoria Hall Stampede, which just, it makes me weep thinking about it now. That was a terrible story. For people that don't know it, just very briefly tell them what happened.
The Victoria Hall disaster is one of Sunderland's greatest tragedies, and I think it's one, like you say, that even when you read about it now, and it was such a long time ago now, but it still makes you wince. It still makes you kind of gasp. So what happened was they had a lot of children gathered in the Victoria Hall for a children's show, magic and comedy and fun. And at the end, they said they were going to give out toys to the kids, which of course got the kids very excited. So they started pushing towards the front of the stage to get the free gifts. When that happened, it did cause a bit of a stampede, and unfortunately, the bolts on the doors in the buildings were locked. So the kids had nowhere to go, and it kind of, the stampede built up, and they ended up, a lot of them being crushed to death, which is absolutely, horrific. It's unbearable to think about. One slightly positive thing, if you can call it that did come out of the tragedy, though, was that we have now the outward opening exit doors, because the doors opened inward for the Victoria Hall. So when adults try to unbolt the doors to get in to get the kids out, of course, the people were pushed against the doors, and the people from the outside couldn't get in because they were pushing against the crowd. From that, there was legislation to always have outward opening doors so that couldn't happen again.
That changed the country's history, really.
Yeah, it did. It did completely, yeah. We were the first ones in Sunderland to implement the policy, but there's a blue plaque to commemorate that. Part of the old Sunderland Heritage Trail actually talks about that and how that came out of the tragedy that was the Victoria Hall disaster.
Where did your love of history come from then? Have you loved it since you were very young?
No, I used to hate history, or I thought I did. When I was in school, I couldn't think of anything worse than a history lesson. I just found it so boring. And I think it's getting the right entry point, isn't it? And I think as you get older, you take an interest in things. You perhaps take an interest in where you live or where you came from. For me, I think a big entry point was chatting to my gran. Every time I would talk to her, she would tell us a different thing that I didn't know about her. She used to work in Pyrex, the factory in Sunderland. She used to stencil the designs onto the dishes. And, she's owned a clothes shop. She used to make her own clothes for the shop. She's worked in a box factory. She's had a very varied life. And every time she would tell us about that, it would just become really interesting. And I thought, how many other parents or grandparents or whoever are out there, and you just don't know their stories. And I think that was kind of the entry point, wanting to find out more about that generation, more about the industries in Sunderland and who worked in them, which kind of led to my first book. So yeah, I think that was the entry point for me.
Which is called, the Secret Sunderland book, which is out now. That's Marie Gardner, photographer, writer, delving into the secrets of Weirside's history. And she's just done some amazing films. You can see it all actually on her Facebook page. So if you just search for her, Marie, and it's Gardner, Gardiner. Definitely worth looking at. The films are amazing. And also she does these incredible photographs of old barns and things over the fells of the North Pennines. And they're really, really beautiful if you've got a bit of time and you're at home. My guest today is Sunderland writer and photographer Marie Gardner. She's found many of Sunderland's claims to fame and some interesting ones, including cholera and concrete boats. We've been chatting about that. If you've missed it, you can go back and find out about concrete boats. It sounds very improbable, but it did happen on BBC Sounds. She also told me that a love of history developed whilst having a chat with her gran, and hearing her stories make history relevant. Here she tells us how the pandemic has brought telling stories of our past to the fore. It's now become all the more important.
There's been an increase in, video content and podcasts, and I think oral histories and things like that are a big thing to come out of the pandemic. People are looking to find different ways to question and to talk to people and to find out more. And I think in one way or another, we've all had a little bit more time on our hands lately. And perhaps that's been a good excuse to chat to parents, to grandparents, to siblings or whatever, and find out a little bit more. And I think that kind of awakens curiosity, doesn't it? And one thing leads to another.
100%. And speaking of curiosity, can you just explain Fizzy Legs for us, please, Marie? Fizzy Legs. It's a film on your Facebook page.
Okay, it's not exactly it's not exactly a film, but it's okay. So a lot of the reservoirs around have what we call bellmouth spillways, which is the really sort of big hole that you see in reservoirs that look like a plug in a bath.
Yeah.
That the water goes down. And I'm not. I love them, but in the creepiest way, and they make my legs fizzy. So when I stand near one, because I think everybody does this, where you imagine kind of if you fell down,
fell in, yes,
the hole,
there's
and
one in the Derwent Reservoir.
Exactly.
There's a huge one there, and I sit and watch that. There's a huge one, and it's terrifying, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. But you can't help but look, can you? And yet it gives us fizzy legs.
Yes, so that's what it is, fizzy legs.
That's what it is.
Well, you've got beautiful pictures on your Facebook page as well of some gorgeous areas around Weirside. I think a lot of the barns that I walk around near where I live, it's an amazing project that you've done. Just tell us a little bit about that.
Changing landscapes is what I'm calling it, and it's been going on for about 2 years now, and it kind of grew out of, I love to walk, and obviously I love to take photographs, and walking around the North Pennines, you just see an abundance of empty buildings, and I find them completely fascinating.
Yeah.
And it started where I just wanted to take pictures of the buildings because they're nice to look at. And then, as I was saying about one thing leading to another, your curiosity kind of peaks, and you go, well, why is this building here? What was it used for? And of course, the North Pennines, we don't think of it like this now, but at one point it was a hive of industry. And, there was lead mining going on there, there was farming, there was quarrying. And then these buildings are kind of remnants of that life. And I just find it really fascinating. So I kind of refer to it as a scrapbook at the moment. So anything that takes me fancy that I want to learn about, I will kind of start investigating. So recently I've interviewed a couple of people, a guy called Greg Finch, who is an expert in lead mining in the North Pennines. He was chatting to us and kind of just filling in gaps in my knowledge about what lead mining and what lead mining life would have been like in the North Pennines. And a chap called Ewan Allenson, who is a fantastic dry stone waller. Because, of course, in the North Pennines, you look everywhere and you see these beautiful, dry stone walls that go on for miles and miles sometimes.
Oh, yeah, they're gorgeous.
Exactly, yeah. You just sort of think, well, who built those? How did they build them?
Is that yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I think everybody does at some point, don't they? It piques your curiosity. Often you would find that the stone walls are made from whatever the material is nearby. So there would usually be sort of a quarry nearby, and it might be a sandstone quarry or limestone or whatever, and that would be what the wall would be made of, because it was the most logical thing to use, because it was close and you don't want to have to tramp lots of stone miles and miles across the countryside. But Ewan was saying even now when he's sort of mostly just repairing stone walls that already exist, he can have lifted tons of stone by the end of the day. So you have to keep particularly your core very fit and able, because it's hard work for your back particularly.
Where can we find the films and buy the book?
Oh, well, you can get Secrets Sunderland and Sunderland Industrial Giant from all good bookshops, as they say, from Sunderland locally and on Amazon. And you can see all of the videos that have been part of Sunderland's Literature Festival on my Facebook page, which is Marie Gardner Writer.
Marie, thank you.